And joining us right now from the United States, where it is 20 past 6 in the morning and 20 minutes past curfew being lifted, is none other than the former Australian ambassador to the United States, good friend of the show, lovely man, none other than the great Joe Hockey, who will be here every Monday night between now and the election, and I hope many, many more years to come. Great man, hello, and welcome home via the TV.
Thanks, Paul. At various moments, I wish I was right there in the studio.
Well, this is it. So let's compare your former life living, a bit of Canberra, a bit of Sydney. Yet tonight you couldn't leave your house. You couldn't even leave your house until only a few minutes ago. What's it like to ride this out as a normal person who just can hear what's happening around them?
Well, I haven't been subject to a curfew since I was a teenager, so this is took me a bit by surprise when the alert came through on the phone that get back to your homes and do not leave until 6 a.m. And we live just a few hundred yards from the Vice President's home, and a couple of miles from the White House, just on Massachusetts Avenue, and all night has been helicopters, sirens and armoured personnel carriers going up and down the road. And, they're clearly looking to respond to everything. But having said that, the Neighbourhood Watch reported that if you call 911, don't bother because the police aren't coming. So that doesn't fill people with joy in the local community. And certainly it's quite a time. I mean, our local shops were looted last night, and, people having been locked up for a long time here are feeling some angst about it all.
Well, and that's the thing, and I sort of touched on it at the start of the show, and I defer to your expertise on this, but it's like, look, there is so much going on here. You've got all sorts, you've got 40 million people unemployed, you've got weeks of people being stuck inside, you've got an obvious response to an act of brutality that should be absolutely criminalised and dealt with, but then you also have the people who want to keep the permanent state of race fighting going in the United States. Now, unless you literally can stop every protester and talk to them, you can't ascribe what all of the motivations are. But I think a week on and nationwide, this has jumped way out of the initial and is now very much into something else.
Look, it started with fear and frustration. Fear about the future, fear of police brutality, which I think you've probably said is very, very real here in America, and there's a history to it. Frustration that people have been locked up for quite some period of time, which has never happened before, and also the fact that in some of these places, unemployment, even though it hasn't come through in their pay packets yet because of various government subsidies, but you've got Georgia that's got 42% unemployment, Kentucky 40% unemployment. Minneapolis, Minnesota has gone up to about 16% and rising. And there is frustration, there is fear, but it's morphed into criminality, and it's been stimulated into criminality by a range of sort of nefarious forces. Antifa is one, but there are a number of other players that are facilitating this. And quite frankly, Paul, it's not hundreds of thousands of people that are out there on the streets. Sure, they are in 50 states, but it's not mass demonstrations. In Washington, 1 million people marched when Donald Trump was elected, and here you've got perhaps at best a few thousand, more like hundreds, that are engaging in this sort of activity. Now, it's absolutely right. There's a lot of justification for fear. There's a lot of justification around the racial divide here in the United States, but there's no justification for criminal activity, which is widespread.
Now, President Trump has said that he wants to list Antifa as a potential terrorist group. We talked a lot in the past hour about what that group is. Do you think that that's a fight that he should be taking on? And if he decides to list it, is that a process that has to then go through Congress, which means Team Red, Team Blue?
Well, I don't think anyone will defend Antifa from a political perspective, but having said that, it's a bit of an amorphous group. It's a gas. It hasn't got any leadership, it hasn't got any formal structure, and there are no laws in America that would facilitate the designation of a local terrorist group. In fact, it might be the Republicans more concerned about that than Democrats. But look, you know, the Democrats have got to be really careful here. In 1968, and George Bush said this to me when I saw him down in Texas, George W. Bush. He said, if you're looking for a period of upheaval, 1961 is the one he remembers, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. There were vast riots in 19 American cities, and they were losing a really unpopular war in Vietnam. Richard Nixon portrayed himself as the law and order candidate and won. So the Democrats would want to be careful not to allow Donald Trump to become the law and order candidate, because that will in turn help to deliver him the suburban mums, white mums, who went overwhelmingly to him at the last election. They'll come back to him, and the independents will come back to him, because there's one thing that will unite all Americans, and is if people are trying to burn down the house, then Americans, whether they be external or internal forces, will support their president.
Yeah, it's all of that, you know, threats, foreign and domestic, and all of these lovely things.